Well, hello, everybody. I'm Brian Lawrence. I'm the CEO of the Seattle Public Library Foundation, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us and for supporting your library. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Seattle Public Library Foundation, we are the nonprofit partner to the library, and we do three things. Number one, we raise private fundraising dollars for more than about 50 different library programs. Number two, we advocate for the library, which is really a crucial need for SPL. And number three, we help build pride around our library. And so the advocacy work is why we are here today, to be a better advocate. It is always helpful to understand the budget situation. And before we jump into a program, I'd just like to do a special call out to the friends of the Seattle Public Library. Our library is very fortunate to benefit from two different support organizations. While the foundation, our organization does the fundraising, the Friends has their book sales and their retail locations at Central and Georgetown, and those proceeds help them operate programs to expand literacy and to promote the library as well. But what we both have in common is that we share in the advocacy work, and it's a great collaboration, and we do that for the benefit of the library. And speaking of the library, we are honored to have SPL Chief Librarian Tom Fay here today. So welcome, Tom.
Hey, thank you, Brian, and welcome to everyone today. On behalf of the library, I wanted to personally thank you for being here today and for your interest in advocacy. It truly makes a difference, as you'll learn today. Our budget depends on support from the public. We truly appreciate everyone who speaks up and helps protect and expand our services for all. It's been great to work with the foundation and friends and advocates over the past few years to grow our advocacy at local, state, and federal levels. We have seen clear successes and new funding because of that work. We're going to need all of your help in the next year and beyond to achieve our goals, which are literacy, enrichment, empowerment, and belonging for everyone at the library. Your support means so much to me and to all of us at SPL. Thank you, and thanks for your attendance today.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for your dedication and your vision. And if you've ever heard me talk before, I always say that Tom is probably one of the hardest working public servants in Seattle. So we're truly grateful for your leadership. I'd like to thank all the members on this in our attendee gallery today, because all of you are likely members of our Public Library Action Network. And, we launched this about 3 years ago, and we are so proud to have more than 1,100 grassroots supporters like all of you signed up and speaking up for our library. And if you're joining as a guest and not a member of the plan, we're going to go ahead and drop the link to join the plan in the chat. So thank you, Will, for dropping that in there. And again, please spread the word, post this on your social media, et cetera, to help us build this powerful network of grassroots advocates. So today we're going to take a deep dive into how SPL is funded and how advocacy through the plan helps the library. And just a few quick notes before we begin. We are going to be recording this session, and so you'll receive a link to the recording and the slides after we wrap up. So feel free to concentrate and listen and not have to take notes, because you're gonna get the slides later. We also welcome your questions at any time throughout the presentation. Go ahead and put those in the Q&A box, not the chat, because the presenter won't see the chat box, but they will see the Q&A. So make sure you put it in there, and then we'll see it. And then if you have questions that you'd especially like answered that you see in that chat box, go ahead and hit the little thumbs up icon, and that will upvote the question. And then Will, who's doing most of the presenting, will be able to see that and be able to answer your questions. So speaking of Will, Will Livesley O'Neill is the Foundation's Senior Director of Communications and Advocacy. He's done an amazing job of really helping to elevate the Foundation's advocacy effort. He'll be leading this webinar. He works very closely with friends. And we also have the library's Government Relations and Partnerships Manager, Kirsten Nelson, who's here in her own free time on our lunch hour to help answer your questions. So thank you, Kirsten and Will, and welcome. And we'll let you all take it away.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks everybody. We really appreciate you being here today. As Brian said, my name is Will Livesey O'Neill. I'm the Communications and Advocacy Director for the Seattle Public Library Foundation. And if you are a member of the Public Library Action Network, the plan, I'm the one who emails you. I think so many of you are here today whose names I recognize, either from chatting with you about library advocacy or seeing you respond to our action alerts. And for everyone else here, I hope you learn a lot about our work to advocate on behalf of SPL today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will get going right into our presentation, which we have called Library Funding 101. Our interest in doing this is in response to a few things. This is an important and complex topic. We want to keep it at the 101 level, but we want to get into the sort of the details about how our library is funded at different levels of government. There's been a lot of alarming news recently. This is a critical time for libraries nationwide and a critical time for SPL, although maybe for different reasons than you might expect. And so we're going to get into a lot of different levels of government funding for the library and how advocacy helps. We will have breaks throughout, so I'm making to make sure I can get to all of your questions. And as Brian said, you'll get the recording and the slides afterwards. So thank you for your time with us here today as we go through this topic. And so I'll go ahead and just get started. So who are we? Brian said at the top, the Seattle Public Library Foundation fundraises, advocates, and inspires pride in our library as a separate nonprofit organization. We are going to focus on advocacy today. I am the advocacy director. I have the pleasure of helping mobilize our advocates to speak up to increase public funding for the library. And I did just want to quickly note that through advocacy, the foundation has helped raise more than $570 million for the Seattle Public Library over the last 25 years. And that's from increases in local funding, passages of the library levy, and other funds that we'll talk about today. And it's a huge part of our work, and it's sort of a central part of our work that we rely on all of you to help us out with. And so we welcome your interest here today. And if you want to get in touch with me, you're always welcome to ask more questions. There's my email on the screen, will@supportspl.org, and I'll put that at the end as well. Really looking forward to your engagement. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to do an overview of the Seattle Public Library's budget. That's its current funding, where that funding comes from, and what it means. We're going to talk about funding at the local level. So that's from the city of Seattle and also from the Seattle Library Levy, which if you're not familiar with what that is, we'll talk about that in detail. We will talk about funding at the state and federal levels, particularly some of the threats that you've likely seen in the news, and also some opportunities and let you know where we see places to step up funding for our library. And then we'll end with a bit of our action plan, how you help us protect and expand funding at each of these levels. So, how is the Seattle Public Library funded? We really want to underscore here that the vast majority of the Seattle Public Library's budget is from local taxpayer revenue. That comes primarily from the City of Seattle's general fund. 59% of the budget in 2025 of the nearly $116 million budget for the library came from the city's general fund. We'll start out talking about where that comes from and what that is. Nearly a third comes from the voter-approved library levy. We'll spend some time talking about that as well. Currently, the foundation funds about 4% of the library's total budget. And the foundation raises private funding to go above and beyond public funding. The programs, the collections that the foundation support do not replace public funding, but rather enhances it. And then about 5% of the library's budget comes from other sources. Some of that is state and federal dollars, some of it is other private sources, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. We wanted to start out with this general picture to really underscore that when we talk about funding for the Seattle Public Library, almost all of it is coming from people right here in Seattle, whether that's through taxpayer resources, whether that's voters for the levy, whether that's foundation donors. What does the budget support? This is a breakdown of the Seattle Public Library's budget in 2025, that nearly $116 million figure that we just showed. 72% currently goes toward personnel costs. So that's the staff, the people that make the library function. Another 10% goes towards books and materials. And then the rest is broken down into capital projects and maintenance, administrative needs, and then programming, the programs that foundation funding largely supports, as well as other costs. We think it's just important for you to know this because staffing is absolutely critical to the Seattle Public Library. Again, it's the people that make the system work, and it's also increasingly the majority of where the budget goes in order to make the system run. And what funds what? This is a little bit of a breakdown, and I do want to note that these numbers are rounded and approximate. They are based on the 2025 budget, um, but they're more to sort of show you how funding is spread out between different sources, which we hope will be helpful when we start talking about these sources in detail. I want you to really know what it means to have general fund support, to have levy support, to have foundation and state and federal support, because as you can see, that support is spread in different ways throughout the system. For example, staffing personnel is largely funded by the general fund, but the levy supports a significant amount of that as well, and the foundation touches personnel in addition. Books and materials are fairly evenly distributed throughout these different sources, as is capital maintenance, kind of evenly distributed between the levy and the general fund. Um, State and federal funding comes into play in sort of discrete ways. And we included those as numbers rather than percentages because they don't follow the same budget timelines as some of these other sources. So we'll talk about those state and federal awards for capital and maintenance a little later in the presentation. Those were over a few different years from different government sources and for important projects, but impact the library a little bit differently than some of these other funding. There's also some federal funding that's available for programming that we'll talk about. And then also in the technology and access category, there are some reimbursement funds for discounted internet access from the federal level. But again, just kind of underscoring that those state and federal resources are important, but a little bit separate from the annual operating budget that the library really relies on, which largely comes from, or almost entirely comes from, the general fund, the levy, and the foundation. So let's start with funding at the local level. Again, this is the primary source of the Seattle Public Library's budget. 91% of the budget this year comes from local tax dollars. That means that our local policymakers have a very important role in driving funding decisions. That's the mayor and the city council here at the local level. And we want you to understand some of the constraints given the way the city is set up and the current budget deficit that the city of Seattle faces, that does present some risks to the library that we're working hard to have our advocacy make an impact on. So the city of Seattle has a general fund. We want to note at the top that the Seattle Public Library is one of only 5 departments named in the original City of Seattle charter. Library, fire, law, police, and parks are sort of the public services that are called out in the founding documents of what the City of Seattle needs to support. Of course, the city has grown a lot, and the city government now includes 40 departments, but it is worth noting that the government of the City of Seattle is set up as such that the library is a central essential service. The general fund is supported by city tax revenue. So that's property taxes, sales taxes, utility taxes, developer fees, parking fees, sort of the variety of taxes and fees that we, as City of Seattle taxpayers, pay directly to the city. That goes into the general fund. The city then determines the budget for how that general fund will be spent. The budget is developed and proposed by the mayor. It is then given to the city council to amend, have public hearings and discussions on, and ultimately approved. This currently happens on a biennial basis. That's somewhat of a recent shift to the city doing a budget that is supposed to last over a 2-year biennial period. Um, there is a supplemental process that can make tweaks to that biennial budget. And really, the city can choose whatever format for doing its budget that it wants and make amendments and changes during the supplemental period as well. So we had a biennial budget pass last year. This coming year's budget cycle will be technically a supplemental process as part of that biennial budget. Right now, about 4% of the city's whole general fund goes to the Seattle Public Library. So that this year amounts to about $68.5 million. So again, a charter service, an essential service, the library is only about 4% of the city's total expenditures of the general fund. And what's going on with the general fund? We'll talk about sort of some of the news over the past couple of years and how it has impacted the library. So last year, as we mentioned, ahead of the biennial budget, the city began to face quite a deficit. The mayor implemented a hiring freeze as a way to address some of that deficit. That had an impact on the library's ability to hire staff. Going into the biennial budget process last year, because of this deficit, the mayor and city council looked at ways to reduce general fund expenditures to address the deficit. Want to just note here that we found our advocacy work from people in our Public Library Action Network to be very valuable last year at different phases of this process. When the hiring freeze was implemented and the library was forced to reduce hours at some locations in response to staffing shortages, we had a lot of people reach out through the plan to their members of the city council, letting them know that they wanted to see a biennial budget that allowed the library to return to the staffing levels needed to operate branches at the hours they were accustomed to. And then also during the budget cycle itself last fall, we had a lot of people reaching out to talk about the importance of the library and the need to protect it despite the city deficit and the impending budget cuts that were sort of projected across the board for city departments. At the end, the library did receive a cut in last year's biennial budget. It was about $2.7 million. This is significantly less than we had feared. There was the possibility for a much larger cut to the library given the city's deficit situation, and advocacy and outreach to elected officials really helped. The cut was mostly covered by sort of existing funds that the library had in a fund balance. It did have an impact on books and materials, as well as some IT needs, the ability of the library to fill some staff vacancies, but it did not affect the library's ability, its library's operations. The library is able to maintain stable operations, and we saw that as a big success given, again, the city's budget situation. Unfortunately, this year and heading into next year and beyond, that budget situation has not resolved itself. There are more cuts forecast. The last revenue projection as of this month looked at about $143 million city deficit projected. That's actually a little bit better of a budget picture than forecasters were looking at earlier in the year, for a few different reasons. There is also, I should note, a proposal that the city council has passed that voters will be considering this fall to raise some additional revenue at the city level that may help with some of the deficit. But the fact of it is that we are going into another budget cycle this fall where the city is going to be looking at cuts to departments rather than to flat funding or even the expansions that we know are needed at the library. How that will work, the mayor again develops and proposes the budget. That proposal will be released in late September, in about a month. That then kicks off the city council budget process. Well, there will be deliberating in October and November. That is an opportunity where the public is able to give input to the budget process. There are public hearings. There's a lot of opportunities for advocacy during that budget process, and the council will wrap up that budget process by November 21st this year. So the next few months are going to be a critical time for advocacy around the city general fund, again, which is about almost 60% of the library's budget comes from the city general fund. So what are the risks of cuts? As we saw, the library, even in taking that much smaller than anticipated cut last year, it did impact books and materials. The reality is that books and materials are getting increasingly expensive for the library, especially digital books and materials, which are much more popular among patrons than they were pre-pandemic. More than half of readers at the library now choose to read materials digitally, which is fantastic in terms of increased access, and we love to see more people checking out more books in whatever format. They do cost the library significantly more because of the pricing models that publishers charge for digital materials. And a cut from the general fund, the reality is it would mean less funding for books and materials next year. The library also has a number of vacant staff positions. Those would need to be likely held open. And as we saw last year, there are possible impacts on library hours when staff positions are open and not able to fill. The library has about 700 employees. It's a large department and has a lot of staffing needs. Um, and then cuts, because of the way that the general fund is sort of spread throughout the organization, as you saw on that earlier slide, the general fund touches everything. And so a cut to the general fund really reduces the library's capacity to do, for example, community outreach, to have staff out in the community outside of branches, to do more programming, to have more diverse programming and more types of programming as we would like to do. There's also a risk of constraining some of the general fund dollars vis-a-vis the library levy. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because the general fund and the levy have this sort of complicated relationship with each other, and especially as they increasingly touch all aspects of the organization with their funding. So what is the general fund versus what is the levy? So traditionally, the general fund is intended to fund the library's operations, the day-to-day work of running the library system. The levy was traditionally intended for enhancements and capital improvements. So things that the sort of day-to-day work of the library can't fund, or the big projects needed to build, renovate, repair library buildings and make capital improvements. The levy started in 2012. That was the first Seattle Library levy. Prior to that, all of the city funding came from the general fund. The levy has grown as a percentage of the library's budget each time it has come up. So right now, the levy is on a 7-year cycle. So it is passed, and then it funds a portion of the library for the next 7 years until it needs to be renewed. In 2012, the first levy, the levy made up about 15% of the library's budget. By 2019, when it was ready to be renewed, it was up to 24% of the library's budget. And as we saw earlier, this year, it's now up to almost a third of the library's budget. And given the trajectory and also the trajectory of other city departments, this is likely to only increase. I want to just note that the Parks Department, for example, has a district fund, which is slightly different than a levy, but it's a ballot measure that needs to be approved, as well as they receive funding from the King County Parks levy that we just voted on. Parks is now up to about 50-50 in terms of the split between general fund and ballot measures for operating, and about almost 100% of its capital budget comes from these other sources. So it's a trend that we see not just at the library, but sort of across the city as more and more of charter service budgets are taken up by voter-approved levies. As I said, the ballot measure first came up in 2012 and was renewed in 2019. It is a property tax increase. That is generally how these levies are funded. And as I said, this is an increasingly common way of supplementing local services. If you're a regular voter in Seattle, you are no doubt aware that we are very frequently voting on levies in Seattle. We are voting on a housing levy, a transportation levy, a county parks levy. Harborview Hospital has a ballot measure. There are lots and lots of different ballot measures that come up to fund these services because, frankly, it is one of few options available to increase revenue. That's for different reasons, given sort of our state's revenue and taxing structure, the political appetite to increase revenue, um, and the deficits faced or shortfalls faced at the local level as far as general fund dollars. Uh, it's not something that affects just the library. Again, it is just sort of a reality in the political system in Seattle and in Washington state that in order to supplement and increase funding for local services, a larger and larger portion of that is coming from these ballot measures. We are lucky, though, that Seattle voters almost always support these ballot measures, regardless of sort of the topic, but the library especially, people feel really passionately about and want to support. In 2019, put a $219 million levy ahead of voters and passed with 76% of the vote. We are 7 years from that, or almost 7 years from that. So we will need to renew the library levy after it expires in 2026. What has this last levy done? What has that $219 million gone to fund? Uh, what is that doing in that 32% of the library's budget that it currently makes up? A lot of things. It expanded branch hours across the system. I will note that there have been some ups and downs in that process for two significant reasons. One is obviously COVID dramatically impacted branch hours. And then the aforementioned hiring freeze really impacted the library's ability to maintain the kinds of branch hours that it needed. We're lucky that at the beginning of this year, the library was back to about 99% of its goal in branch hours, and supplemental funding for that came in large part from the last levy. Levy dollars purchased many, many, many more books and materials. Almost half of the books and materials purchased by the library last year were funded by the levy. It created the Peak Picks program, the much beloved Peak Picks program, which I know many of you are likely users of. That was a direct result of the 2019 levy. It funded improvements to technology, digital equity, like hotspots that can be checked, Wi-Fi hotspots that can be checked out at the library. It did fund a programming increase, specifically around children's programming, and it funded large capital projects. The university branch is currently closed because it's undergoing a seismic retrofit to keep the historic framework of that beautiful building, but make it earthquake safe, make it climate resilient, put in air conditioning, put in more accessibility features, expand the interior space. That project is funded in large part by the 2019 levy. A similar project just took place at the Green Lake branch. It reopened last fall. If you haven't been, go check out the Green Lake branch. It's a pretty amazing project that they were able to preserve this historic Carnegie Library while modernizing and making it safe. That was a sort of central project of the last levy. And it also, the last levy eliminated late fees across the system. All right. So 2026, as I mentioned, the levy is up for renewal. It's while the timeline has not been determined for a possible renewal, this is what it might look like. Toward the end of this year and into next year, the library would work with the mayor to develop the package. Because of our system of government, again, much like the budget, the mayor proposes ballot measures like this. That is then transmitted to the city council, likely in the spring. The city council then has a chance to weigh in on what is in the package, the amounts, make amendments, and then finally approve to send that to the ballot, which would mean, again, if this timeline comes to pass, that next summer would really be the time where there's a campaign to talk about passing the levy ahead of a vote in the August 2026 primary election. What happens if the levy were to not pass? I don't want to think about it, and I hope that you all have some wood that you can reach out and knock on. But as we saw at the beginning, the levy touches everything in the library's budget. It's not as traditionally intended as sort of this enhancement or separate source. If the levy were not to pass, it would be critically damaging across the library system throughout the budget and manifest in many, many different ways. Again, it passed with 76% in 2019, and Seattle voters are very supportive of the levy and the library in general. But we do just want to kind of underscore its importance. Okay, I've been talking a lot. Let's go to check on some questions. And thank you to Brittany Moraski, who is our chair of our foundation joint advocacy committee that we have with friends and other advocates, who is dropping some links in the chat to sign up for the Public Library Action Network, which, as she mentions, is going to be a critical way that we rally support from the community ahead of the coming city budget cycle and ahead of the levy. I see that Brittany has also answered a couple questions already in the Q&A about the loss of federal funding, and about ways to weigh in. We have a question about how many staff positions are currently vacant. I would actually love for Kirsten Nelson from the library's government relations team to pop in maybe to answer that question.
So first of all, hello, everybody. Thank you for accommodating me on my lunch break, so that I can attend this meeting in my capacity as a regular citizen. The number of headcount that is currently open, I actually don't know the specific number that we have. We are trying to keep it at a bit of a minimum. One of the things that the library is a bit different, we are a department that's not an executive department. So for any open headcount that we have, if it's deemed absolutely necessary, it can be approved by Tom to be hired. So for example, if somebody who is a regional manager who oversees a region of our branches were to leave, even in the case of a hiring freeze, we can appeal to Tom to then have that position hired. There's a whole process that it goes through. We are obviously not operating at top numbers, but we're doing the best that we can. I wish I could tell you the exact number, but I don't want to get in trouble.
Thanks. And Kirsten, I'll have you jump in on this next one too, and I'll get to all of these, but I just saw a great question that we didn't talk about, which is something very notable happened besides COVID and the hiring freeze that I didn't mention, which was the library was cyber attacked in 2024. How did that hacking incident impact the sort of budget projections?
So one of the big things that it happened was that we had to do a lot of immediate dialing in to address it. That was bringing in consultants at a breakneck speed, and those aren't cheap. So one of the things that we had to do was sort of reallocate some of our funding in order to cover the costs of addressing the cyber attack. It came from a couple of different places. A little bit of it was underspend. There was some reallocation of other funds. And then there was some just overall cost cutting. It was certainly less than what we had hoped for, to have to make additional cuts to our budget. However, it was not absolutely devastating, as far as like, we're going to now have to cut an entire department, or we're going to have to furlough people, but it definitely impacted our budget. And a lot of the things that end up being impacted most easily or noticeable to the public is some funds are trimmed from collections from time to time.
Great point from Bruce about, I bet construction costs have increased unduly, so the money allocated for construction may not stretch as far in, say, 7 years. Exactly. That has been a big issue that we've been dealing with. The 2019 levy passed before COVID, before inflation, and the funding that was included in the levy for capital improvement projects like the ones I mentioned at Green Lake and University just simply did not stretch as far as was needed. And one of the reasons that those projects are still ongoing is because of some of the delays associated with trying to cover that funding. We'll actually talk in the next section about how state and federal funding, that's been one of the most important places that is plugged into the library system, is to help address some of those runaway costs. Kirsten, I don't know if it's fair to say like the construction costs for some of those projects were nearly double what they were projected to be in 2019.
Absolutely. Nobody saw the impact of inflation or COVID And then there were just overall delays as we all saw there was a labor shortage at that beginning. So then everything was just skyrocketed. I believe Green Lake was budgeted for like 8 million and it came in at 13 million, or somewhere around those ballpark numbers. But that just goes to show you that, yes, we would never have assumed that was that drastic of an increase 3 years, 4 years into a project.
And I just want to mention too, that's another thing to underscore about that balance between what the city is funding every year through the general fund versus what the levy is funding. That the levy is supposed to last for 7 years. There are always going to be unforeseen events and changes that occur over the course of a levy. And so when more and more projects and other things are reliant on levy funding at the risk of other funding, it does create those issues. Um, Really quickly, I just want to address these other two really good questions. Jade asked, does the Plan Network ever collaborate with other departmental advocacy groups to strengthen our voice and protect multiple projects? That's something we are very interested in doing, especially this coming year with the city budget, and not necessarily even departmental advocacy groups. There are a few other groups like the Seattle Public Library Foundation that support and advocate for specific departments, but just with other coalitions and organizations that are working to protect city funding across the board from cuts. And one ask that we're going to have of you all, in addition to engaging with the plan and sending action alerts, is help us connect to those groups. If you have connections or if you're part of other groups advocating around the city budget, I would love to connect with you and connect with them because yes, working in tandem with other groups that are really paying attention to and care about the city budget is quite helpful for us. And then Annabelle asked about the public schools budget and their budget deficit. In what way does this impact SPL and create or complicate opportunities for advocacy? It doesn't directly impact SPL. There is a good working relationship with the schools on a few programs. But I think it creates opportunities for advocacy as far as people are really paying attention to the needs around education, and the library serves an essential role in the community in providing education programs. So when the schools are undergoing budget issues like they are, I think it only makes those library education programs even more important. Um, Kirsten, I don't know if you want to address that, and then I see Brittany, you have your hand up, so feel free to jump in here too.
Yeah, so one thing I would say that we do see is our partnership with Seattle Public Schools continues to be a very deep partnership. We really try and focus on areas where the schools need additional assistance that they're not able to provide just based off of their budgetary operations. So we see a lot more increase in interest in programs like our homework help, because those are things that the school just does not have the resources for. And those are amazing programs that we actually get the library gets a lot of funding for from the foundation, because the community is super focused on trying to fill some of that gap. And so it becomes more apparent when the school system is facing such a large budget deficit, the role that the library needs to step into and play a support role.
Yeah, go ahead, Brittany.
I'm going to read a question from Gregory Abbott. Boulder, Colorado created a separate library district last year funded by dedicated property tax. Do any large cities have such an arrangement? Has it been considered for Seattle? What are the pros and cons?
The great question. Yeah, thank you, Sharon. I think put that in the Q&A as well. Kirsten, I'm going to throw that to you again too, because I think this is something that the Foundation's Advocacy Committee helped the library look into a few years ago about the benefits and drawbacks of creating a library district, and ultimately found that there were more drawbacks in Seattle than benefits. Do you want to just quickly touch on why that is?
Yes. First, I want to call back to the public schools. We do have a program that Tom just reminded me of. It's the Link Card. So it's where we help with kids getting access to the library, to the internet, and all of those things. And it's an amazing program that just highlights how close we partner together. As for a library district, it is a complicated issue. There is no quick or easy way to talk about it. Right now, they're called tax implement funding districts. And we do have several in the state. And right now, they're still so new that there are so many nuances. And the funding districts right now, these library districts, you can't necessarily guarantee all of the resources. So in theory, it sounds great. So King County Library System is currently has some of their geographic bounds do have financing districts incorporated that are for other services. And it pulls apart resources in a way that the state has not fully thought through. So this would be like adopting a new technology without understanding all of the pitfalls. There's also a way that if you create a library district, some of the integration that you have with some of the other systems within a city become a little more strained because you have to go through different processes. If you look at the Seattle Parks District, we implemented, instead of Seattle Parks and Recreation being wholly within the city of Seattle, they are now a parks district. It's added a massive layer of bureaucracy. So anytime that the Parks District needs to change prices or something like that for admittance into the pools, for example, they have to get everything approved by the city council, because there's half of the city council sits on this Parks District board, as well as other community members. So it becomes this large unwieldy thing. It doesn't move quickly. Um, it has been looked at. There are benefits, there are detractors. Right now, it is not in the best interest of the library until things get a little farther down the road, more developed within the whole state as far as the infrastructure for these tax increment financing districts go. But yes, it is complicated.
Yeah.
Um,
No, thank
and
you. And thanks for the question,
no,
because it is a really important issue that I wish we had more time for, but I want to be conscious of time, and I want to jump ahead to um, our next topic, which is state and federal funding, which I'm guessing again, many of you have been hearing about in the news with cause for alarm. And so we did want to spend some time just kind of talking about what funding the Seattle Public Library does receive. It's small, but it's growing and it's increased in recent years. The role of our advocacy in driving some of those opportunities, and then the obstacles, some of which we all know about, and some of which maybe we don't. And we'll have another break for questions about this section too. So at the state level, the state of Washington has no dedicated funding source for public libraries, unlike most states in the country, which may come as a surprise to you given our state's well-deserved reputation for literacy and passion for reading and for libraries. We don't have a dedicated funding source. There are some discrete funds that have opened up in recent years. The Department of Commerce has provided grant funding available for library capital projects. That started in 2019, and it has provided some funding for those seismic retrofit projects at Green Lake and University. Um, that's been a really important source of funding that SPL, had not received state funding for work like that in a very long time. So really excited about that, but we will just note that that discrete grant fund is very small. I think it's $20 million across the whole state. And we know that there are well over $20 million in maintenance needs just in Seattle. So it's a sort of a drop in the bucket compared to the need. Um, we have seen more and more opportunities just by having better connections in Olympia, though, with better connections with our state legislators, better connections with the Washington Library Association. And one great example is we were down in Olympia for a library lobby day a couple years ago, and in talking to one of our legislators, heard about some opportunity for district-based funding, asked what the library's needs were. The library had a need for one of those new 24/7 pickup lockers that you've seen outside of branches across the city, and the state was able to, through the connection to that legislator, provide $93,000 for the pickup locker that is now outside the Ballard branch. So thank you to Senator Noel Frame for helping secure that funding. It's just an example of the type of funding opportunities that can come from good relationships with your elected officials at the state and at federal levels. But it is at least the way it's set up right now, it is always going to be a little bit more of those discrete opportunities because, again, there isn't this dedicated source that we can turn to or rely on at the state level. State also has its own budget issues, which have been well covered recently. The state was facing a $16 billion shortfall deficit at the end of this year's legislative session. I just wanted to note too that Washington State, we also restrict local property tax revenue. There are state laws passed through the initiative process that put a cap on the amount of revenue that municipalities and local jurisdictions are able to raise through property taxes. So that impacts down the line the ability of cities like Seattle to fund charter public services like libraries. That is a state level issue. It is something that there's been a lot of momentum in recent years to address at the state level, and libraries have an interest in participating in some of that advocacy. But public libraries also have lots of other needs at the state level. One, I mentioned earlier, the sort of runaway cost of digital materials and ebooks because of the pricing models that publishers place on libraries. We're hopeful that that could start to be addressed at the state level. The state is exploring legislation aimed at better understanding and regulating the costs of ebooks for libraries. The state could do a lot more to support collections to help fund the purchase of books and materials, especially at small and rural libraries that really rely on external sources and don't have the resources or the fortune of having, a large foundation donors like we have here in Seattle. Um, there are, book bans at the state level, rather that we've seen in other parts of Washington State that can be addressed at the state level, and the Seattle Public Library is and Foundation are always doing what we can to support more access to books, whether that's through our Books on Band program that the foundation funds that lets young people anywhere in the country, but including many young people in other parts of the state of Washington, access digital materials at the Seattle Public Library and read whatever they want. But also there's state legislation that can go into help making some of the book ban stuff that's been going on in Washington harder. And then, as I mentioned, there's just aging infrastructure at libraries all over the state, and that $20 million Department of Commerce grant funding is not going to cover it all. We really do need a dedicated funding source for public libraries that could cover both infrastructure, capital projects, and things like collections materials. And we are hopeful that we're building some good momentum and good relationships at the state level, but again, we categorize that as small, but with the potential for a lot of growth as it is right now. And then at the federal level, you all may have heard about the Institute of Museum and Library Studies, which is the federal agency responsible for providing funding to public libraries and museums. One way it does that is through grants to libraries. SPL has received IMLS grants over the years, and actually we recently concluded a $250,000 federal grant through the foundation to create a project on teen mental health, sort of virtual space for teen mental health that is now going to hopefully serve as a model for other library systems around the country. In addition to those grants, IMLS provides lots of support for ebooks, for example, helping with the cost of digital materials at smaller libraries, support for staffing resources, support for infrastructure. This is especially important for state libraries like our Washington State Library, for rural libraries, tribal libraries, specialized libraries, libraries that really need that support from the federal government. And this agency amounted last year to a whopping 0.003% of the federal budget. However, it was targeted in March for dismantling by an executive order from President Trump. This has created chaos at the agency that has led to layoffs, has led to reduced access for the materials and programs that were federally funded at libraries across the country. It's led to closures in many cases. I want to just emphasize it has had a minimal impact on the Seattle Public Library. We don't ever want to say it has had no impact because, one, we support resources for libraries across the country, and also SPL works with other libraries in many different ways. But we do get a lot of questions about how the sort of chaos and cuts at the federal level has impacted the Seattle Public Library, and right now the answer is minimally. However, there has been a significant impact on our friends at the Washington State Library. Their budget was decimated, frankly, both by the IMLS cuts and by the state budget cuts this past year. They've had some real issues with staffing. They have had to essentially close the Washington State Talking Book and Braille Library to the public. It's still operating, but it's no longer as open to the public. It's harder to circulate those materials. That is an essential resource for expanding access to materials in our state. It's located right here in Seattle in South Lake Union. So there are real impacts from the threats to IMLS. I will just note IMLS, in order to continue in any similar form to how it has been, would need to have its budget restored, and it would also need to be reauthorized by Congress. The current Senate proposal for next year's budget does actually restore and increase funding for IMLS. However, the House does not have its proposal out, and as we know, the administration has made clear it would like to essentially eliminate this agency from the federal budget. So many variables as far as IMLS funding at the federal level. Again, no large direct impacts to the Federal Public Library right now, but devastating impacts across libraries around the country. Federal funding touches SPL in other ways, though. One way is through other agencies that can provide funding that can benefit the library. For example, SPL did a great job of securing a grant from FEMA at $5.2 million for climate resilience. Essentially, what this will do is provide air conditioning at the libraries that don't have it. There were several historic libraries that did not have air conditioning, that if you're a patron of one of those branches, you may know they close down in the summer when it gets too hot, presents real equity and access challenges. SPL during the Biden administration was able to secure FEMA funding that has come through to help sort of finish that work at those branches across the system. That's a huge deal. It's really important and an example of the types of federal funding that can make a big difference when that funding is prioritized and available. But building relationships with our members of Congress does lead to good results. And we've seen that the last couple of years and continue to see that, despite some of the challenging environment in Congress and the difficulty Congress has in ever passing a real budget. Because there is this earmark process where members of Congress can direct funding to their districts, we have been able to build relationships with Representative Pramila Jayapal and Representative Adam Smith, who both represent parts of Seattle, to help secure earmark funding to help with really important library capital projects. So Representative Jayapal was instrumental in providing funding to sort of bridge that gap we talked about in the inflationary costs that were holding up the university branch project. That project is now moving forward. And Representative Smith has been really instrumental in trying to secure similar funding for the Columbia branch, which also has a need for a full seismic retrofit, but because of those inflationary issues from the last levy has not been able to get started yet. So that amount has been proposed in recent budgets, and because Congress hasn't passed a real budget in a little while, that we're still sort of waiting for that, but it's been very useful to have that in the budget. So the long and short of it is for us and for advocating for the Seattle Public Library right now, we have a supportive delegation in our members of Congress and in our senators from Washington State. We're building the relationships. Because we're building those relationships, we're hearing about more opportunities to secure these federal funding, but we just know this is a very hostile environment for libraries and so much else right now. So we want to continue to work with our delegation to seize on those opportunities where they're available, while recognizing that at least for the short term, there aren't going to be tons and tons of opportunities that are available, and more likely they'll be pursuing things like the IMLS cuts that have created so much chaos elsewhere around the country. I'll pause there for a last question break because I know, the federal and the state stuff is often very interesting to people. And just stop there before we go into kind of our action plan.
So I do want
air
to
conditioning. Oh, go ahead, Kirsten. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I do want to note that there are a couple of questions. One from Jade regarding digital books. Check out digital books versus physical books, the overall pricing of them. It's a wide range, but in general, your ebook licenses roughly go from about $25 to $65 per title. That's just one specific ebook. And then the physical copy is $15 to $35. It is worth noting that for physical books, if we order them in bulk, we are usually able to get a discount from the publisher. There are certain incentives for libraries to be buying these physical books from them. With ebook licenses, they are a license, which are usually time-bound or use-bound. There are several different types that publishers have in place, and so it all just depends specifically on which one the library selections team used or
Yeah.
acquired for that particular thing. But yes, it is something that is costly. It is one of the things that, to note, some of the advocacy that the foundation has been working on is trying to get a better understanding of the price impacts to libraries for digital content, ebooks, audiobooks, and various other digital forms of consumption that patrons use. And so that is one way that the advocacy team through the foundation has really been focusing their efforts to understand that this is not fair to libraries going forward, and it is not a sustainable solution, especially as those prices increase, but our collections budget may be decreasing, and we're trying to address the needs of what our patrons want. So.
Yeah, thanks. And I see Annabelle has a great question too about do large philanthropic organizations such as Carnegie support SPL? Good timing on that question. The library and the foundation recently secured a $450,000 grant from the Carnegie Corporation, which will expand services for English language learners, immigrants, and refugees here in Seattle, which is great. It's fantastic news. It's much needed. And I think it's a recognition by Carnegie that libraries have a lot of needs and are really important right now to address needs in our society. And we hope to see more of that moving forward, especially given some of the realities that we're talking about with public budgets. Okay, I am conscious of time, so I'm going to go right to what we're asking of you, what our action plan is to address some of these concerns. We have immediate concerns with the budget. We have the levy campaign possibly next year, and we have some long-term goals. As I said earlier, the budget proposal will be released in about a month, which is one reason we wanted to have this discussion now, because we're going to find out very shortly if how much the library is proposed to be cut in the general fund budget. There will be public hearings on October 7th and November 6th at City Council. If you are in or joining the Public Library Action Network, you will hear from us about those hearings. You will hear about opportunities to testify. You'll hear about opportunities to speak up about the need to protect library funding. Our goal is to preserve, potentially even increase funding for SPL in this budget cycle despite the deficit. So you can help by being part of the plan. When you're part of the plan, we will send you action alerts to write to your city council members when the budget is out. We would ask you to share that link. Please, please, please share that link. We want as many people as possible getting those alerts so that they get as many messages as possible. It really matters when a city council member receives 2 messages versus 200. They really do notice the issues that people are most prioritizing when talking about the budget. And then, as I said, we will let you know when there are opportunities to testify, to come to one of those public hearings, or even potentially to meet with your council member. We will be having arranging meetings with council members throughout this process too, and those are great opportunities to plug in. If you're interested in joining a meeting and speaking up, we will let you know about that through the plan. Next summer, possible levy campaign. Our goals are to pass that levy. That levy has to pass to keep funding. Whenever it happens, that levy has to be renewed to keep funding SPL at the level that it needs. And we want to also use that campaign to expand awareness and support for SPL throughout the city. It's a great opportunity when people are voting and seeing a campaign to think about what the library means to them and how they can get involved. So you can help by voting and making sure everyone you know votes too, making sure if it is on that August primary ballot that people know there's an election in August and to get those ballots in. There'll be opportunities to volunteer for the campaign and make connections and make calls. And then also help us be a connector. As I mentioned earlier, we would love to hear about organizations that you are involved with that you think might want to support the library, that could be either part of the campaign or help us spread the word. Please, please, please connect with me if you have those connections. That is one of the most important things you can do as a library supporter, is to kind of leverage that support elsewhere in the community so more people know and more people can help us spread the word. And then long term, we're really looking to expand our influence locally. We want to build on the momentum and seize on those opportunities at the state and federal levels. And as I said, we want to just expand the base of people that know about and care about speaking up for the library. So whether that's voters for the levy, whether that's advocates like you volunteering, whether that's our elected officials hearing from people and realizing the library means a lot to people, or whether that's connecting with more people who can be part of our coalition. We really need your voices to help do that. So I, again, just cannot thank you enough for your interest in this topic. This is, again, a public agency budgets are a complex topic, but your time here today shows that you really understand and care about why it matters so much to the library services you value every day, and we really truly appreciate it. I'm going to skip ahead, and we can come back if people want to stick around, but sort of separate from this advocacy issue, but important right now is to the library is they are just launched a community survey to where you have the chance to let the library know how to improve library services, how you feel about spaces and collections and programs. And that's another great thing you can do to help the library. It really helps when SPL has information from the community about how their services are benefiting people or can be improved. And so we really encourage you all to also take a moment to respond to that community survey. And I think Brittany has put that in the chat a couple times throughout this presentation, which I appreciate. But if you all go to spl.org/community survey, that's a great chance to weigh in and make your voice heard as well. So I will wrap there. Thank you all for your questions and comments. I know we're at about 1 o'clock, so I really appreciate your time. If anybody wants to have any last minute questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer them. But otherwise, I really just want to thank Tom and Kirsten for coming on their lunch hour, Brian and his support at the foundation board, like members like Brittany, and all of you. We really, really, truly appreciate you. And you will be hearing from us soon because, as we've discussed, we are approaching a very important time for advocacy for the library. So we're going to need you. Thanks a lot.
I also want to take one moment to reiterate something that Will pointed out. People love libraries, and they are super easy to just not think about because, oh yeah, we love the libraries. So when funding cuts or anything happen that impact library services, it is your voice that matters immensely because elected officials don't know that people are that concerned about something until they hear about it. So please do know that your voice matters more than you could ever imagine.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And after we share the recording and the slides, if you have more questions or if you want to reach out to connect other organizations, please do reach out to me. And I look forward to hearing from you and working with all of you on advocacy this fall, next summer, and well beyond.